Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ashley. I appreciate it. And I came off camera just to say hello to everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. I appreciate you taking just a small portion of your time for students and parents to come and visit and work with us today. As Ashley stated, there will be an opportunity to ask some questions, and especially if we're with a small group of folks here, feel free to come off of mute if I'm going over some PowerPoint slides and you want to, just kind of dive in a little bit deeper and have some discussion around the topic that's just on that particular slide itself. So I'm going to cut my camera off just for buffering purposes, just to make sure that I stay and keep connected here. But we'll go ahead and get started. All right. So, hey, listen, welcome parents and students. Again, I am Emily Collins. I am the supervisor for secondary math, and that spans grades 6 through 12. And we'll, kind of focus in on the high school world today. But I absolutely want to thank you for joining us. And we'll discuss a little bit about some assessments, some strategies and support that you really should be doing in your classrooms, and some of the things that within a timeline that you should be doing in order to prepare yourself to be college ready for that success track to get you where you want to go and to meet your goals. So after our session today, we'll just kind of talk a little bit about, what are you doing this year as it relates to standards? That information that every state has students become proficient at, right? How does it look in the state of Florida? What changes are going to be coming around the corner? The second thing we'll talk about is just really understanding, what do we look for when you're in the classroom? What are parents? How can you support your students? Students, what are you supposed to do in that classroom when you're there? Maybe struggling with the concept or trying to prepare yourself on the right journey to make sure you're successful by the end of your senior year, right? And then just understand a little bit of the resources that's available in preparing for college, really honing in on the SAT or ACT component, just making sure that you're giving yourself options as it's time for you to make that choice, whether it's a career or whether it's college, but just being prepared to occupy the real world in which you're going to live in after you graduate. So I started off this with another session, but I'm just on the Joe Boiler for this school year. But one of the things this author says when it comes to students is that, we don't want students to calculate quickly in math. We're moving away from that. We really want to look at our students and be able to have them ask good questions, having them map out their pathways, being able to reason about complex solutions and setting up models. And then communication is the biggest thing I can say that has changed in the math classroom, especially just being able to talk about the strategies and solutions and the ways that you were thinking about solving problems. Problem solving is going to be huge as it comes from your earlier grades in math, and then it carries on into your conceptual understanding as you get into high school. So if you're in your classroom right now, students, and you're not doing a lot of talking, I want you to step it up. I want you to go in. I want you to be that leader in your math classroom, your ELA, your science, whatever it may be. But I want you to make sure that you're an important part of the learning process as it's happening in your classroom. All right. So do keep in mind the combinations of the in-class and the online and the hybrid and the remote learning is really not going anywhere. It's more than likely here to stay, but I think it is very, very good practice for some of the things that you'll see as you maybe do dual enrollment or you do some of the college courses, maybe in high school, and as you prepare to transition over to college. I think it is very good practice that we're having some of the online and hybrid components just to give you the experience as being prepared as a college student, in other words. So keep that in mind, keep that quote in mind as you're kind of going throughout your year. Now, I always like to show this because I want to remind you, when we look at math, it's a known fact, just through the research, students with 1 year of math that goes beyond Algebra 2, they were twice as likely to get a college degree or certificate. it's kind of saying that, man, you know what? They persevered, they stuck it out, they went to a harder type of math course that was more rigorous. And so, with that being said, they can get into some of the higher courses and be successful at it, right? So, when you get into courses such as pre-calculus or AP statistics, even, or AP calculus, what it allows you to do is work on your judgment, your decision making. You have most of the time better writing, better communication. You're able to analyze data. You're able to break things down and problem solve it a little deeper than maybe a student that haven't went beyond the algebra 2. Our occupations now, of course, they're changing, but about 70%, it will require you to have mathematical knowledge. Now, you may use some of the equations in order to do it, but you'll want to have to know how to work through and problem solve for some of the major things that go on with different corporations. So keep that in mind. So that's very, very important. Now, as we talk about expectations for the 2021-2022 school year, and parents, I do want to remind you, and students, we're still within our current state standards. And we call those standards MAFS, MAFS. And so I do want to tell you, this is the last year that we're going to be assessing on our current state standards. And so what will happen beginning the 2022 and 2023 school year, we're going to go to our newest standards that are called BEST standards for mathematics. And you'll probably like the standards because what they've done is made these standards much easier to read. So much so, you take a parent looking at the BEST standards and they're able to read them where they're clear and concise. You can literally look and understand what is it that your child needs to know within a certain course. So that is so important. I think one of the biggest things that will happen this year. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is because with testing, you're going to take a couple type of tests this year. If you're in 9th or 10th or even 11th, you're going to take the PSAT. You even have some practice in the SAT, as well as your end of course exams. And as you transition, let's say you don't pass some of those end of course exams, you'll want to know and be versed with the new standards that's coming, as well as the SAT, so you can get a concordant score. So this year, we're really, really working with our teachers as well as our students just to make sure that the clarity of what standards are, just being able to understand, I'm in Algebra 1 or I'm in Algebra 2, this is the expectation of what I'm required to do. And then this is how I can meet the learning objectives in order to be successful. Not just getting a grade, but really understanding and learning and progressing your math career, I like to call it. You want to progress so that you're able to move and grow throughout your high school years. So we have a couple content priorities there. And a lot of our schools have double block support where you're able to learn material on, say, that A day, for instance, and then B day, you're able to practice it a little bit deeper. All right, I'm going to stop right here just in case we have any questions. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Hi, my name is Miss King. I have a junior, of course, in high school. I wanted to know, in light of what the governor DeSantis in Florida has announced regarding the FSA, this being the last year for that, how does the MAFS align to that? I just want to make sure. I know there's a lot of acronyms. I don't want to get them mixed up, but how does this correspond to the new information that was recently released by the governor of Florida?
Great question. I'm glad you asked. So the new acronym, which is FAST. So there is a lot of acronyms. I have to agree with you on that. And so just to give everyone else on the call some background information, the FAST is going to say, well, it's a proposal, but it's going to say, let's remove the end of course exams that we have, and let's replace those exams with progress monitoring, which means that a student, for instance, will take a beginning of the year, a middle of the year, and an end of year exam in order to determine if growth is occurring for the student within that one grade year, right? So what happens with maths, our current standards, our students that are in courses, this year, especially for state tested courses, they're going to test on our current standards. So FAST more than likely, it may not be available even in 2022 or 23 school year. It's more than likely going to be the 2023-24 school year where FAFSA will actually go into effect. So if your child, for instance, they're taking the FSA end of course, and I'll give you an example. We have a lot of 12th graders. We have a lot of 12th graders that have not passed our Algebra 1 end of course requirement for graduation. So what happens is there's a couple different ways in order to pass it. You can retake the Algebra 1. You can take the geometry end of course, and you can get a comparative score. It's like what we like to call it. You can take the, if you're a 9th, 10th, or 11th grader, you can take the PSAT and get a concordant or comparative score. You can take the SAT or the ACT and get a comparative score if you're, still not able to meet the Algebra 1 end of course FSA proficiency score. So the students that are in school now, just to sum all it up, they will be tested on the current state standards, which is the math standards, and not our new BEST standards. So hopefully to answer your question.
It does. I guess, I don't know. It just seems like, and I would just say the progress monitoring is not new, at least not to me. My son has been doing that probably since the beginning of high school. So it just sounds like it's going to be more of a standard. I prefer the PMAs, honestly, because I think it does allow for that refresher instead of getting to the end of the year to kind of do a big overhaul. So I guess it just remains to be seen. It is a little bit, obviously with students that are looking to graduate, or juniors or seniors, with it changing midstream, especially knowing that the requirements for them to graduate, it's like, how does that impact their requirements now for graduation? So I don't know, it just seems a bit, upended for parents and students, because we're kind of stuck in the middle, if you would, in changes. And I realize that's the way of the world, things change, but it's just odd that it's changing midstream when they're trying to make sure they have everything they need to graduate. So
yes.
Anyway, thanks for explaining.
Yeah, no problem. That's a great point. I think that is a sentiment with many parents, as well as students, as well as educators, right? And these are abrupt changes. So I always like to, I'm a statute person, so I'm the person who's gonna read the whole entire Executive Order 1932. I'm just gonna read the whole entire thing to see what specifically is going on with it, because there are a lot of questions. It is a proposal. More than likely it will end up passing, of course, but we don't really know how that looks yet, because I don't know if algebra or geometry may have a change, or if those end of course are just referring to elementary and middle school. So that portion hasn't been shared, because I don't think it's kind of been through past the proposal piece yet. But I'm going to stay on my feet, and I think everyone's just kind of reading to see how that guides us. But very good question.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so and here's just a quick timeline. When the order was given into the Education of Commission, the Commissioner of Education, I should say, I'm saying that backwards, but it was the Executive Order 1932, and it was an order just to say, hey, we need new standards in Florida. And it went through pretty quickly. You can kind of see in 2020, 2021, there was some PD that began for especially with teachers and stuff for ELA and math. We were still working with the current standards, but ELA went through an adoption process, not only with books, but their curriculum began to change, right? And then 2021, you can see how they had new books, they had new curriculum. Well, for math, just so you're aware, for this school year, if we're looking at 2021, 2022, we're going to go through a brand new book adoption. So this is our adoption year. So when the kids come back in, for instance, Ms. King, for your son, like in his senior year, he's going to have new textbooks, which I think is a good thing. But for this year, we're going to go through that book adoption, and then we get to 2022 and 2023, we will have new textbooks, and we will have new standards. So it will be a change. But As I said before, I think you would like the new standards because they really are clear and concise and provides a lot of guidance for teachers and parents. Really, all of the stakeholders will have the ability to say, wow, I look at the standard and it shows me, okay, a student should be here in algebra, but back in 8th grade or 7th grade, they first start learning about linear equations. They did not get it, so I literally can just kind of jump backwards to kind of close those gaps. And it's clear enough for all of the stakeholders to look at it and do it. So I think that's one of the things that I think educators will enjoy about the changes that's coming, at least for that school year. All right, so one of the first things I always like to remind parents and students, so very important as we close out, the first 9 weeks. It'll be ending somewhere in October the 8th, I believe is the exact date, and report cards go out October the 18th. So one of the most important things that they're going to see far as assessment wise, the PMA1, which is a progress monitoring that goes to all state tested courses such as 6th, 7th, 8th, Algebra 1, geometry, you have your ELA as well, 10th grade, things like that. Through that window, September 28th through October 13th, and I wouldn't know your exact date because the schools are going to select the days in which students will test, but they will be assessed, at least for math, they're going to look at those first 7 to 8 weeks of instruction that they receive, and they'll have an assessment which is going to monitor their progress. How well are they doing on the topics that were taught by the teachers within that time frame. The second most important thing is going to be the PSAT, and I'm going to dig into that a little bit deeper, but remember that date, October the 13th. It is so very important, especially for our, I always like to say 9th, 10th, and 11th graders, but there are a select amount of students that are 9th grade that take it. Most of the 10th graders will take it, and then there's a select group of 11th graders that will take it. But you'll notice that in 11th grade, you have what we call as the national merit qualifying for the scholarships, and so that's very important there. Also on October 13th, if we have seniors that just have not met some of the graduation requirements in ELA or math, they're going to also take the SAT test. This is a non-reported test, and they may have both that day. They may have the reported and non-reported, but with our non-reported tests, the kids get a little bit longer in school in order to work on this test in order to get that score. So those dates there are so very important. Now, you will also see here, I have the assessment dates for the year from the state. Our end of course exams there, you can kind of see it in the bottom right. There are multiple different windows. If we look at our Algebra 1, Bio, Civics, Geo, U.S. History, these windows right here, you'll be able to tell when students will test. Now, some of these will be retake windows. So let's say if you have a student that's in geometry right now, they can use the geometry end of course score to meet the Algebra 1 graduation requirement. But if you may be a parent that say, my kid does pretty good in Algebra 1, I think they could actually pass the test. It may be a possibility they'll come during one of these windows in order to take a retake. We also have some other dates here. You can kind of see specifically for the grades as we get into the heavy testing season, as we get into April and May. Those are specific to the grades when we have those big, FSA end of course retakes will not be included in there, but it's just our regular administration for those students that are in those particular classes. All right, I'm gonna stop right there because that was a lot. Let me know if you have any questions before I move on. All right, so don't forget when you're looking at your FSA score, students, look at your historical score. If you're in 9th grade, go ahead and take a chance to look at your 8th grade and your 7th grade score. You want to see how you performed in algebra or geometry or statistics. You want to make sure that you're able to move the needle in some of those particular topics. And it takes just a little bit of practice sometimes over an extended period of time in just one of those domains. Even if you said, I think I was pretty close in algebra, let me take about, 90 minutes each week in order to practice a little more of my algebra skills so that I can increase this FSA score. We're always pushing to have a level 3, which is our proficient score, which, you know, pretty much you pass the test, but we want to see students grow. We don't want to just say that, oh, you were a level 3 and you did great, so we just expect you to be proficient. Well, no, we want to see if you can grow into a level 4 or a level 5, because you know, some of the topics you're going to cover a little bit deeper, but some of the topics are going to be the same topics as you begin in 6th, 7th, 8th, and get into algebra and geo. So take a chance to make sure that you're looking at your scores. You want to have a springboard place to say, this is where I am, and if I practice just with a little bit of practice, I'll be able to move the needle in many of those domains for these particular assessments that you take, especially with the FSA. So keep in mind, I definitely want to have you look at this. These are the concordance scores. So if you're a student and you didn't pass the Algebra 1 end of course, for the graduation requirement, these are some alternative tests that you can take in order to meet this concordant or comparative score to meet the graduation requirement. So again, the PSAT, you can kind of see it there, the SAT, the ACT, as well as the geometry end of course. Now, PERT is, we don't have any more students that are in the school system that is able to take PERT. So that's one of the things. We used to have the PERT option. It was one of the better options. It was a really good preparation test for kids in just saying that, hey, are they beyond intermediate math as they're preparing for college, those things there. But PERT no longer is an option to meet the concordance score. So that's just kind of gone away. I think we've, all of our kids now have graduated out who was able to take the PERT. But keep in mind those 4 things there: PSAT, SAT, ACT, and the FSA geometry end of course, if you are a student that needs the Algebra 1 end of course graduation requirement, if you need that met. So very important. All right, let's dig a little bit deeper. So
I have another question for you. Hopefully there will be one that aligns to English as well pretty soon. I know this one is on math, but when you were talking about the FSA and the PERT, because I know my son took the PERT last year and you know, he's now able to take college credit classes right now. So that won't count. I mean, that just allows him to just take college classes. I mean, that doesn't really account for anything else. Is that what I'm hearing?
So it used to be able to, it's a great question, actually. It used to be able to allow, like I said, the concordance score. But what PERT was originally designed for was to make sure that colleges were able to assess where students were starting at when they're, you know, starting their college career. So there are different places you can start in college. You don't automatically just go into like college algebra. Depending upon how you perform on your PERT test, you would get placed in intermediate math, or you may even get into remedial math. So what happened was many of the high schools were already using PERT to say, hey, you know, you're getting ready to go off to college. We want to make sure that when you take this test, it provides the college the background knowledge, at least on mathematics, to tell them where to place you. And we were making sure and hoping that kids, it's always desire that kids get into college algebra if they can. We don't want them wasting credits on taking intermediate or remediation or remedia, you know, math in college if they don't have to. But that was the original design of PERT.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so the PSAT, so don't forget, PSAT is coming up October 13th, and so the scores range from 240 to 1440. Again, there's select 9th graders, 11th grade students will take it. Many of the 10th grade students will take it. You have less than 1 month to practice, just less than 1 month to practice, but you can do it. So I'm definitely asking you, parents, students, if you can commit your student to practicing with the SAT, the PSAT, and the SAT, really. But I'll give you a place where you can go in order to practice for that. But if you can commit to doing that up until, October 13th, I think you'll be able to get a lot of feedback that can help you pinpoint areas that you may need the improvement on. And the PSAT provides a lot of information for you to just see if you're on a success path with being successful in college level type of courses, right? And it'll also tell you what you will need to work on in order to be successful on the SAT. So very important that as you begin to practice and you show mastery material, it gets a little bit easier. But the more and more you take it, especially PSAT and SAT, you get familiar with the test format, how they're going to ask questions, and then you use your knowledge from what you learned in your classes that you're already taking in order to help you out to be successful on those. It will, like I said, the National Merit Scholarship Program, I guess I'll say that, but 11th graders, you have a option, and not even an option, but depending upon how you score, you can get into the National Merit Scholarship Program, and it's just really about the scholarships and the colleges and those things there. But there's a lot of money. I mean, there's hundreds of millions of dollars in scholarships that's connected to that PSAT. And I think we had a list just came out recently, but maybe Duval County had about 37 students in the district that qualified for the National Merit Scholarship Program from last year. So this is always an important thing. I just always say push. You never know what can happen. You practice, and you figure it out. Now, I will give you this nugget. If you practice at least about 20 hours, using even Khan Academy, and we'll talk about Khan Academy, you'll show like an average of 115-point gain on your scores. So just practice, got to get you better there, and it can help you increase. Now, don't treat this like a baseline. I want you to take it serious so that you can truly get some feedback to just kind of help and guide you on what you should do to prepare to be successful on the SAT when you take it. But so very important. So keep that in mind. And you can ask me questions if you want to. I'm going to move on. All right, so let's talk about the SAT here for a little bit. Now I want you to take a chance to kind of look at that. SAT is so very important. It is, it's accepted in all major universities, of course, and your score, it can make you stand out from over probably 700,000 applications. There's a lot of applications received by colleges every year, but high SAT score, it does equal scholarship opportunities. It's out there. There's a lot of scholarships, but you want to be able to meet some of the standardized test expectation for students. And remember, the SAT is a test that's designed to say, hey, I don't care where you went to high school. I don't care if you were in New Mexico or if you were in Florida or if you're in California. I can give you the same test and you have an opportunity in order to perform like any other student in the world on this same standardized test. And so that's why colleges, and universities, they take it as important when they're trying to look and qualify folks to get into their colleges. And parents, just don't forget, and I know you know it, but university tuition, it is not cheap. It's not cheap at all. So definitely a perfect time to encourage your child to work hard and getting a merit scholarship, even if you can. Work with your guidance counselors. Always reach out to see if there's any local scholarships. Always reach out to look in FAFSA, of course, they have scholarships there, but talk with your counselors to stay informed about what is available for you to do. Now, I always tell students, begin to write your letters early. Most scholarships, anything that you apply for, they want you to be able to write a letter to tell you about yourself, or to tell you what you're doing for extracurricular or what makes you stand out. It could be a couple different things, but always have those prepared so that you're able to fill out as many scholarship applications that you can. Now, I will tell you this, it's recommended that you take the SAT at least 2 to 3 times. That'll allow you to get the best score. You don't have to report to a college every single time that you take it, but the more often that you take it, typically you're going to grow in your score, and you have the option in order to report out the best score that you can to the college that you desire to go to. All right, any questions? No, that was a lot. All right, so when we think about the SAT suite of assessments, these are some of the things that SAT tests that they give. And so some of this start early. Some of our students already have experience because they took the PSAT in 8th grade. And then they end up taking the PSAT again in 9th grade. And then you have another opportunity, right, to take the PSAT. And then you'll take the SAT multiple times, maybe with sometimes the same year that you take the PSAT. So what happens, students are already learning many of the information, much of the information that they need in their classrooms, and that provides a lot of the benchmarks for assessing the student's progress as they kind of move throughout high school, right? So these scores from the SAT suite, from any of these, they can be reported online, and they're actually available for students to set up their account on collegeboard.org. And on top of that, they can link their Khan Academy for tracking and practice purposes. So that's a good thing. I absolutely love that about Khan Academy and collegeboard.org. And I'll give you some of those websites a little bit later. But keep that in mind. So as we look at performance goals, and I want you to take a chance to look at this, and this is really for students and parents, as you look a little bit deeper, I think one of the major tasks probably in establishing a goal for a score needed for school that your child wants to attend, you definitely want to do the research. There's no rocket science as to if a school will let you in, because some of it has to do with the extracurricular that you do. There are just many different things that go on that application. But if you're shooting for a certain school, you got to do your research. You want to go into even collegeboard.org, and you want to look at the universities and colleges that you're interested in. So in this illustration here, it shows what we call is the 25th to 75th percentile boundaries. And that simply just gives the middle 50% of the admitted students for the most part. That's what it's saying. So I know you're kind of wondering, what does it mean? Well, let's look at Princeton, for instance. It means that 25% of enrolled students that receive the SAT score of 1430 are below. You can kind of see it there. And then 75% receive the SAT score of 1570 or lower. And that's kind of what it means in percentiles. Now, I don't know if you know this, but I'm sure you do, but a perfect score is 1600. Perfect score is 1600. So you can kind of see the range of students that are admitted to the universities and colleges. Now, it's not saying that you have to have a perfect score, but with certain universities and colleges, depending upon the focus of the school, I'll give you an example, like a MIT. MIT is a technical school, right? So for many of their math folks that are entering in, they may want you to have a range for just a section of math, anywhere between a 750 and an 800. And an 800 is a perfect score for math, but it just depends on the focus of the university. So keep that in mind, especially as you're looking at College Board and trying to decide which college that you or university that you would like to go to. Now, the average SAT score is currently about 1059. So don't think you have to be all the way up there in the 75 percentile. Don't think you have to be at the 25 percentile. Depending upon how early you apply to colleges, sometimes that's how that's an added feature, I guess, on how you're accepted. If a school, you look at the University of Florida, if a school already has too many freshmen that they have entered at a certain SAT score, it's not that you were not good enough in order to get into the university. It's just that the percentage of students that they wanted at their score has already been met. And so this is another reason why we tell parents and students and probably your guidance counselors, they talk to you about it. But when you're applying to college, make sure you get those applications in early. Make sure you get those applications in early. If you look at our local universities down there at the bottom, you'll kind of see that University of North Florida, it has a 25th to 75th percentile range of about 1090 to 1260. But the thing I can tell you, just make sure you do your homework. Search on the collegeboard.org website for information all about colleges and universities. I'll start right there and see if you have any questions. All right, no questions. Okay, so, well, I'm just going to tell you this. You can do it. You can do it. So with this, you've heard how important it is. I think I've kind of talked to you about that. The SAT, don't get it wrong, it's not the most important factor in college admissions, but your grades and your curriculum are the most important factors. So grades are so very important, and the classes that you're going to take, those are also very important. They're going to look at your transcript. They're going to look at the scores that you have on your SAT or maybe even ACT. But, like I say, there's a big however. I'll just say that your standardized test scores are likely to be the first thing that college admissions officers see in your applications. So that means that you probably stand a far better chance of getting strong consideration by your dream school if your scores are somewhere in that middle 50% or higher of the school's admitted student scores. So just keep that in mind as you do it. Now, I've recommended you just begin as early as your 9th grade year, identify potential favorite colleges, like know your colleges, know what you potentially want to do, talk to folks, try to get you some summer internships if you can, and figure out, what's the best route, the things that you're interested in other words. And you'll be well on your way to sealing a deal, guarantee that. But definitely start early as you go into it. So the SAT emphasizes fluency and understanding, so it's vital that you're practicing important skills that's learned in middle school, algebra, and geometry. And there is some algebra 2 in there as well, a little bit of statistics, but it's kind of intertwined. The heart of algebra is probably the largest focus of the SAT math section, and that accounts for approximately 1/3 of all the math questions. So a lot of algebra. You want to do your practice. You kind of want to get fluent with how to answer certain questions. There are 17 problem solving and data analysis questions, and all of these questions are on the math calculator subsection. So just knowing, the setup of the test sometimes helps you out as well. There are also 16 passport to advanced math questions on the SAT, and that's mainly about the structure of equations and expressions. So if you're really good with that, that's a plus, but learn how to, again, answer those type of questions. And then that last 10%, it targets our geometry, our trigonometry, and complex numbers. So that's really, these are kind of the areas here. These are the 4 different things that you're going to see on the SAT. And don't forget, SAT is a time test. So very important that you know how to attack the test as you're going through it and work through it in an appropriate amount of time. Now, if you have a question about ACT and SAT, even, I kind of go through a breakdown of that with you, but with the SAT itself, heart of algebra, kind of what I just went through here, is 33%, passport to advanced math, 28%, problem solving and data analysis is 29%, and then those additional topics is 10%. So just keep that in mind as you're going and preparing and figuring out, what you want to practice and work on. Now, I do want to tell you the difference between ACT and SAT. Some students find ACT to be a little bit easier, but it has a science component. So the ACT with the science component is normally kids saying, you know what, I just don't want to take the ACT. But it's not a bad type of test. There are just, some differences in ACT and SAT. Now, the ACT just has a single math section, and it contains probably about 60 questions, and it lasts just 60 minutes. That's it. The SAT, in contrast, it has 2 distinct math sections, right? So the SAT, it has historically been test focused far more on complex problem solving, and then the ACT is quite designed with more straightforward skill demonstration. So some students can and find the ACT a little bit easier because it's skill-based and not so much thinking that you need to do to find the most appropriate correct answer. The questions on the SAT also, they increase in difficulty. And but the thing I love about that, you don't have to get every question correct to get a perfect score. So let's say you had 25 questions in one section, you literally could get 18 questions correct in that section, and not even all the other questions correct in the other section. You can get a perfect 800 score in math. So you don't have to get all the questions correct in order to get that perfect score. So parents, I say all this to say your biggest job is to help your child get comfortable with algebra and geometry. And they really can master either the ACT or the SAT as long as they're practicing their skills in those particular subject areas. All right, so that was a lot. So I'm gonna keep going. So the math section, and I'm focused on the SAT because I want to push everybody on this call to make sure that you're taking it so you'll know where you are. I love giving students options, and this is one of the standardized tests that provides students options and selection of college and scholarships and those things there. But the math section of the test, it normally comes in the third order. So you may get like writing or English first, but math section normally comes in the third order, and it includes about 58 total questions. And specifically with that, there's about 20 no calculator test questions. And what I suggest is about when you're practicing, when you're going to Khan Academy or you're going to College Board, for those no calculator, I would tell you it's about 1 minute and 15 seconds on average. I want you to time yourself as you're going through those questions. So again, for the no calculator section, I want you to spend about 1 minute and 15 seconds. See if you can answer those 20 questions in 1 minute and 15 seconds, especially when you're taking those practice tests. And when you get to the 38 calculator questions, about 38 of them, I would tell you take about 1 minute and 26 seconds on that calculator section. So again, on the no calculator, there were about 20 questions. Take 1 minute and 15 seconds. And then on the calculator, there are about 38 questions there. Take about 1 minute and 26 seconds to see if you can solve each of those questions there. And that'll give you practice on timing yourself when you're under pressure of taking the SAT under a time constraint. So, just believe it or not, your child can answer any question on the calculator section without a calculator. You don't need a calculator, but the calculator, if you know how to use it efficiently, even your graphing calculator, whatever it is that you bring, you'll be able to speed up the amount of time that you spend not having to do something on the side of your paper or just doing a calculator a little bit quickly. But every last test question that's in the calculator section, it can be answered without a calculator. So to say all of that test section, you have about 80 minutes total for both sections there. And it's the longest part of the SAT, to be honest with you. It's just the longest section of it. So just be ready for that, much longer than your reading in the other sections there. So it's important for your child to really practice it. We definitely want them to build up the focus energy just to get through those that section that's the longest on the SAT. Students and parents, when you give to your students, always start off with what you know. Just give you a couple strategies, whether you're taking SAT or whether you're in your classroom. Always start off with what you know. Write it down. So for example, if you're given a question that asks you about a y-intercept, you have to know that x equals 0. Like that's a part of solving for the y-intercept. You learned this part of it in algebra, but there are multiple strategies, multiple ways you can map that out. So here's a couple of suggestions as you're beginning to practice and get your strategies. Make sure you're reviewing your basic concepts. Those critical math concepts you learned in algebra and geometry, they have to stay with you. You have to keep them fluent. You got to practice them. Memorize all of your common formulas. Make sure that you know those by heart. You sometimes don't have a chance to look back at the scratch paper because you're kind of wasting time on doing that. So memorize those formulas. I mean, even the ones that's on the formula sheet, go ahead and memorize them. It's okay, especially if they're quite easy, right? That will definitely help you save time. The 12 formulas on the formula sheet, they deal strictly with geometry for SAT, just so you know. So geometry is such a small percentage on the SAT. But on the formula sheet, there's 12 different formulas that's on there for the geometry. So there's other simple formulas like slope intercept, for instance, that you'll need to know. They're not going to give that to you on the reference sheet. So make sure you do your due diligence in understanding that. A third thing I can tell you is, plug in answers and numbers. A lot of strategies that we use, one of them is back solving. Be able to use especially a multiple choice test, which the SAT is, be able to back solve, be able to kind of use your thinking and reasoning to answer questions in a more effective way. I'll say that. Always start with choice B, and that's just my recommendation there. Always start with choice B or C and determine whether to work yourself up or down to get a higher or lower answer. And a lot of you probably didn't know that, but just start with B or C because the answers, they move in that way. And you can kind of see some of the ones that I have there on the slide there.
I do have a question, Ms. King, again. You mentioned before that the questions, I think you mentioned SAT, it increases in complexity based on what you answered prior. My question is are the questions weighted differently based on the complexity?
Yes, you're asking all the great questions today. I love it. So it is not weighted differently. So, and here's the reason why. I tell students this all the time. There are some of our smartest students, they get stuck on the easiest question. And some of them, they will get the easy question wrong and they'll get the hard one correct, right? So this is what we tell students sometimes, and we always tell students, scan your tests. Take a chance to look at those things that are familiar. Like, you don't always have to start with number 1. Like, you can totally go to number 10, or you can come back to number 8, or you can work some of the harder ones you think, or come back to the easy ones. But they all have equal weighting and equal points. So it's just kind of a strategy, a strategic thing for a student when they're, sitting down taking the test. It does increase in complexity, but that does not mean that a student sometimes is not able to answer it, because sometimes students, they're able to answer some of the harder questions before they answer the easy ones.
Thank you for that. I wanted to ask you a question. I remember when I took my board exam, my class was the first one that took. I was on the computer. So that leads me to this question. For the ACT, SAT, is it computerized or is it paper? I heard you say that they can skip through. So I don't want to take for granted, everyone's in the computer age with these standardized tests. So is it computer or not?
Yeah, it should be computer. Now, I'm not going to, because some things have changed recently. These tests update on, and I'll have to look. I'm gonna look on College Board site to see, but it should be computer, but they were doing paper-based, but there was a lot of change with COVID. So I'll double check that and see if they do. If they do have computer as opposed to paper, what happens is they still can skip ahead. They just have to mark, you mark your question to come back later to answer it. They'll have to, just kind of be really good at doing that, so to speak. Okay. But I'll double check because things have changed.
It allows them to, I don't know what the new, and I haven't researched it since the COVID, but some of the tests, depending on the format, I'm not sure what format they're using. If they skip one before they get to the end to finish, they'll have to confirm they've answered all the questions, or you can see which ones don't have a marking by it, which allows them to go back before they submit. But like I said, I'm not sure if it's computer or paper. I just want to know before, he sits for his first day, but we can research that on our end. I just thought you may have some insight on that. No worries, I'll look into it, but thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to look though, so I can know. But with COVID, a lot of things have changed. So I will look that up so we can figure out before we get off the call, though. It's a great question. Don't forget. So with this, of course, I did give you a lot of information. I gave you a lot of information. So I'm going to recap it a little bit just so you can get on your correct success path. Don't forget, once your child has taken their PSAT, you can link that PSAT score online, and you can receive, that free personalized study plan. They can actually tell your child, like, hey, geometry maybe was a little low, so let's get you on a study plan to learn some of the things that are expected for you to understand to be successful in the PSAT, of course, leading to the SAT. And again, as your student begins to practice and show mastery of material, the questions, they do become a little more challenging, just so they can prepare the student for the test day itself. There are a lot of practice tests out there, and this is one of the first things I always tell you to do. Take the practice test and time yourself. Okay, take those full-length practice tests. You can print them out. You can get answer sheets as well. They'll even go through the answer and kind of the rationale for doing it. In some of if you're in a math for college readiness class, or some of our algebra 2 classes in high schools for Duval County, some of our teachers are beginning to do small group practice as it comes to use of the SAT practice test, so that students are prepared when it's time for them to take it in the different dates that they have it throughout the year. But this is always a great practice program, because it can set up alerts. I mean, I had a nephew that was doing it recently, but it will set up an alert for him. I think he was doing his Saturday at 10 a.m. But, it set up an alert and he knew to go and log in. And every once in a while, it give him some practice, then it'll give him a test, and it'll allow him to just kind of check his progress and continue on based off of the recommendations that they were given for him to practice. So definitely take a chance to visit, and I'm going to say visit both satpractice.org. You can also go to collegeboard.org, and you can go to Khan Academy in order to connect you with this. So very important with that. Now, a couple last pointers. Just parents, be sure your child sign up for the student search service. Help your students to just find the school that is right for them. You can type studentsearchservice.org, and let me put this in the chat just in case. With your reminder and your SAT fee waiver, our students can take the SAT without having to pay for it out of their pocket. So just make sure that you're reaching out to your counselors. Your guidance counselor will have more information about this. It was typical that students had about maybe 2 waivers for their whole high school career. So make sure you have opportunity to talk to your guidance counselor, because they can definitely give you more information about if a student, can use that waiver if they haven't done so already. So very important to do that. Now, I'm going to give you a Khan Academy. So if you can scan this really quick, because this will take you to the Khan Academy test prep practice. So very important. You can get started with this today. Now, as I keep going, this is what I want to remind you. I always give everyone the basketball analogy, because I think it's so important that you understand you learned a lot of building blocks when you're in elementary. You learn how to do some things fluently, and then you students begin to just kind of expand their thinking process in middle school, and then it kind of coherently all came together in high school. And it's the same way, kind of like with basketball. With basketball, you learn how to do layups, you learn how to do free throws, you learn some of those basic things in order to get better at dribbling, in order to get better at defense, in order to get better at team offense. You learn all of these things there, then you get to three-point line, and you just become a superstar. You become an NBA star, right? Well, NBA stars, what they do every single day, almost many of them, they practice layups, they practice free throws, they practice all of the basic things that made them successful. They don't piece them apart. So they begin to make and create all of the fluent things that they were doing in order to get them to a success pattern. It's the same thing with school and education and learning. And this is in any of your courses, any of your topics. You want to make sure that you understand that it takes a lot of practice. Now in math, that's probably a lot of it. It takes a lot of practice. So math, you're going to start out with being able to fluently do something, like you can solve equations very well, but equations look a little bit different in calculus, right? So you'll have to have some conceptual understanding as to how do you understand how to, just make a different type of form in order to evaluate something. And then we go into application, which is our problem solving, a lot of real world contextual type of problems there. So the more and more you practice, the better and better you'll get at something. And I think that's just part of life, right? So I always give the basketball example. Start and keep your basics, and it will take you a long way. You'll expand out, and you'll look back and try to figure out, man, how did I get so good at this? Well, you got so good at it because you practiced it. So parents, a way to support your students, just make sure you're staying informed, stay involved, stay informed, stay engaged. Always call out to your parents, to your teachers if you have any questions, or your building admin, especially if you have any questions. There are many, many ways you can help your kids when you're home. Reading is always great. I always say if you can take a chance in order to set time aside a couple days out of the week to find your good book and do some reading. It's so very important. Review and discuss the homework with your child. Communicate, of course, with your teachers. Attend public meetings. Make sure you're part of all of the meetings that we have going on, especially throughout the district and within the schools, is so very important. We often want to hear from stakeholders. Learn about standards and how they affect your child's education in school, and then always look through your child's backpack. And this is another thing, I said this earlier on another Parent Academy, but the backpacks are so important because you want to see what's going on. A lot of times we don't talk to our kids when they're, coming home from school. Ask them about their day. They'll tell you some exciting things that hopefully they were able to do within that day. But it's so very important to keep the communication gate open, right? I just want to show you some of our core and supplemental lessons that we have for our resources. We want to get kids all the way into pre-calculus and calculus and get into statistics. It's so very important, I think, that they do that. Now, the Algebra Nation and the Edmentum, I want to show you that because Edmentum is a new Tier 2 program we bought this year for high school students at algebra, especially in geometry, to support our on-grade level work. It's so very important that they just have as much practice as they can to be successful at the standards that they'll receive on the FSA end of course. And Algebra Nation, I want to definitely show you that because Algebra Nation also has SAT and ACT practice. So they can go into their Algebra Nation account and they can get this on their phone even if they needed to. They can get the Algebra Nation app and they're just going to do single sign-on. And they'll be able to go in and go through a SAT, ACT practice. And I think that's one of the things, even if they're, whether they're in algebra or geometry or algebra 2, wherever they may be, but they still have that option available with the Algebra Nation resource there. So I wanted to kind of remind you of that. So don't forget, when we go into our online resources, it's still located in blended learning. So they can click on that and they can always get district support over the weekend or outside of hours if they need to, if they're having any problem with getting on. Parents also for you just coming here and just checking to see what's in OneView, see what's going on, when is a board meeting, those things there. Keep yourself informed. This is all located on duvalschools.org. I'm kind of rushing through it because I know I've been talking for a little minute here. So these are some resources available at your fingertips. Just take a chance to always the fldoe.org kind of gives you some updates of what's going on in the state of education. And it's so very important that all stakeholders are involved and just aware of maybe some changes the governor or senator or the commissioner of education. So you want to look and see how that affects your district, right? FloridaStudents.org kind of connects to our CPOM site if additional practice is needed with certain of our content. Welcome to join there and do that. Here's also the PSAT practice. I think, okay, yeah, Ashley put that in there earlier. And then the Khan Academy SAT practice site. So as we continue, don't forget some things you see in the backpacks. You want to look at your child's work and make sure that they're being challenged. You should see some real world examples that promote what students learn in English and math. A lot of writing and those things there. Supplemental online course support, just continuing the practice that they have in their core class. Math that requires students to use justification instead of just procedural type things. We want them to have written out problem solving strategies, not just telling us, okay, the answer is 8. Okay, well, how did you find that the answer is 8? Or be able to put that into context, and answer it. Kind of want to go a little bit deeper there. Math homework, of course, that asks students to write out how they got the answer, and math homework that asks students to use different methods to solve the problem. So it's so important that we allow them to kind of map out where they go and answer their questions. Now, parents, be sure you have these conversations with your kids. Ask them, did they work with someone collaboratively today? What type of tasks did they do? So that you're making sure that they're in the classroom and they're having an opportunity to learn. Ask them if they learned something new, maybe something that's connected to the career that they want to go in the future. Ask them that they feel any growth of their mathematical knowledge, what type of new learning connected with them for that day. Also ask them what math problems did they learn? What did they go over? Just kind of help them to sometimes explain the work to you. A lot of times we're, kind of disconnected from the math, but see if they can walk you through a problem. If they can walk you through the problem, that means they definitely understood and learned the material for that day. And also ask them, how do they use that math and can they show you an example? Always so very important. Now, I'm all the way to the end, so I'm going to open it up for questions. But again, feel free to email myself. I am Emily Collins. You can also email the director of mathematics, which is Jasmine Walker. It's our K-12 director. But we definitely want to hear from you. If you have any questions or anything that we can ever assist with as your child is being successful in high school and progressing through, please reach out and email, and we'll do our best in order to assist you. So I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to open up the floor for questions.
Okay, thank you for the presentation, lots of information to digest. So lots of different things that I wrote down that I want to go back and fine tune. But I wanted to know, I know that my son mentioned that I guess the other parent academy courses, because I do want to look at some other ones that I may have missed. But will this presentation also go on the YouTube video, or will we have access to these slides somewhere?
I can answer. So it will be on our website starting tomorrow afternoon, early evening. And it'll stay on the website through the weekend. And then Monday or Tuesday of next week, we'll transfer it to our YouTube channel.
Okay, fantastic. And I had my last question was around the Edmonton. Like my son's in Gear Up as well. He's one of the schools that was selected for Gear Up, and he had a chance to participate. I think it was last fall, and I think it went over into the spring. But it really honed in on English and those English standards, etc. I wanted to know, you mentioned that for the math, how we have access to that, because I had to just go back real quick to see if you can log in, but it still only has the English, information, not the math aligned to it. How do we get access to that?
All right, so great question. So when he goes to his blended learning, and let me see where I can probably show you, but when he goes to blended learning, he's going to find his Study Island icon. So
Okay.
the Edmonton program is called Study Island, and he's going to single sign on to that, so he can go through blended learning. It's probably near the end of the page, because I think they're in alphabetical order. And once he logs in there, he's going to have a teacher that would have assigned work to him, for instance, based off of maybe standards they're covering in class. But it houses, and what math is he in?
He's in pre-calc honors 1.
He's in pre-calc honors. So I will probably have to go back and look at the standards there, because I know it's for state tested classes. But I'll go back and look and see what standards are exactly available for pre-calculus honors.
All right. Well, I think if that's it for tonight, thank you so much, everybody, for coming and sharing your time with us. And thank you, Ms. Collins. It was a wonderful presentation.